On time WTIC. Another day filled with news and events. The legislature has announced it's not coming back for this session officially, will not be back. By constitutional provision, this session of the legislature has to end on May 5th, I believe it is this year. And that means that they won't be able to get in before it's over, so they'll call a special session, which I believe they have to do anyway because they've got, like a $500 million hole in the budget this year that they have to fix. And then they said they want to try to pass some of the laws that they were talking about before COVID came along and saved us, at least temporarily, from that legislation. And the other thing is that Themis Klarides, the Republican who is in charge of the Republicans in the House, she announced, you remember a couple weeks ago, Len Fasano, who's the Republican leader in the Senate, he announced he wasn't going to seek re-election. He's going to be retiring. And Themis announced that she's not going to seek re-election. So lots of change going on. And to talk about such things, we've got Rob Sampson here, Senator from Wolcott. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing great, Todd. Glad to join you.
Thank you, sir. So there's so much happening, and I suspect that the thing you're most concerned with is the shutdown and the prolonging of that, but wherever you want to start, let's go.
Yeah, I cannot wait for us to get back to talking about politics and taxes and gun bills and God knows what. But I'm somewhat relieved by the news today that the session is essentially terminated, but also concerned, obviously, because it's going to mean a special session, which could be anything. And at this point, I think it's kind of up in the air, although I'm hopeful that the majority recognizes that we cannot be taking up things that did not have a proper public hearing. And it's limited to just the absolute bare necessity of what is needed to be accomplished.
Now, why would they think that was something that they should be thinking about?
Well, I think that there is a concern on their part, and a legitimate one, that some of the more outspoken, legislators and radio personalities might take issue with, some attempt to pass legislation via emergency certification or without going through the legitimate process that is necessary for us to pass laws.
But I figure that the Democrats are sitting around thinking their year has been made by this virus. They must just be in heaven over this, don't you think?
I think in many ways, yes. I think that sadly, this has been an opportunity for an advancement of not so much a legislative change or a way our government is structured, but an acceptance by society that the government really has the power to do a lot of the things that have been done, both nationally and on a state level. And I don't know that that's the case. I can't imagine even 20 years ago, and certainly not at the formation of this country, anyone saying that the government has the right to dictate the movements of free people, or that someone would be ticketed for sitting on a park bench next to someone else. That kind of thing is just blows me away that is actually going on in my America in April of 2020. It just doesn't even seem possible to me. And so they definitely have moved the ball, the Overton window, as they say, in a big way. And I think that hopefully that the resulting, response to this ultimately is that American citizens recognize the loss of their freedoms and fight to get them back.
Well, the other part of it that I figure they're excited about is that the Democrats have virtually destroyed the state in terms of its financial present and its financial future as a result. The debt is so big because of the election rigging scam known as public sector unions. The money, the debt service on that debt is 30%, I guess, of the budget. And they get to walk away from that maybe, or at least pretend that any problems that happen moving forward didn't exist before. And all this happened because of the virus. Oh, we've got this horrible debt. They're probably looking for some way that they're going to get federal money to help save the state from its debts. Nancy Pelosi was just pushing for a $500 billion add into the relief package that would be for helping states out with their debt. And Connecticut's got tons of debt, and the average person will never know that debt was there long before the virus came along.
Yeah, no, Todd, you make a valid point, and that's the shame of politics, that there is very little, responsibility or transparency, accountability. I don't know that the average citizen is very, very familiar and acquainted with the finances that the state of Connecticut is experiencing. They have maybe a loose understanding that the state is in debt and is poorly managed, but they don't know to the extent of that. And this crisis has certainly allowed both our state and federal government to borrow against the future in an unbelievable way that I don't know how it can ever be recovered. And this, you're right, they could use this as an opportunity to disguise their past mistakes as simply part of the virus. But I'm hoping that people are smarter than that. And some of us, certainly you and me, are going to remember what the situation was beforehand and the actions taken by those people throughout this process that have exacerbated it. I don't know that the solution was an incredible bailout of the American, business community, as part of a stimulus package necessarily. And I don't know that bailing out the states afterwards is going to be the right answer either. I think that in many ways, this is just moving the chess pieces on the board, because the same people that are ultimately going to pay the taxes to make up for that money are the people that are receiving the money now.
Well, as far as people running for re-election, so we've got a problem now as a country. We're talking to Rob Sampson, state senator from Wolcott, a Republican. And the most, I won't say the most conservative, because I don't know if that's true, but the most tied to the Constitution and constitutional values, I think, which may or may not make you the most conservative, because that's a whole different thing. But anyway, you want them to be the same thing, and that's the nice part of it. So thank you for being here. So go ahead.
I would love to talk about that subject. These words, they drive me crazy because everyone has a different view of what all these words mean. A lot of people want to say that, Sampson, you're not a Republican, you're a conservative, because they feel that Republican is a different thing than conservative in some way, or you're libertarian. These words have different meanings to everyone, and that is the problem. You say it best, though.
Well, it's one of the problems, yeah.
The American system of government. That's what I believe in.
Yes.
The American system of government, where the people have the power, the government is responsible to them. It should be small, and people should have freedom to pursue their happiness.
No, that's right, because people will sometimes try to corner me on the Constitution. I say, look, I'm not devoted to the Constitution. I'm devoted to what the people who made the Constitution were devoted to. And that is the idea that the most dangerous thing they would ever do in their lives was to create a government. And they were very cautious because they were so aware of how destructive and ugly government is. And yet they knew that they had to have one. And that's the problem that we all live with, that governments are destructive, dangerous, hateful things, even ours. And it's becoming more so all the time as it grows bigger and bigger and more like all the other governments in the world, where it becomes justified to plunder excessively, to waste trillions of dollars like we're doing right now. Are you appalled, Rob, by the spending coming out of Washington?
I am beyond appalled. It doesn't even seem possible to me that there was no opposition movement, really. You had one guy that kind of made a small stink about it. But really, anyone who believes in limited government and personal responsibility and the notions of capitalism is against wealth redistribution, or, you didn't make this and all of that stuff. They should have been standing up and explaining that this is not the solution to fix our economy. The solution.
So what? Explain what you would have.
It always has been. I mean, if you believe in freedom and capitalism when times are good, you should believe in those things when times are bad also, in my opinion.
So is there's never a case in your book when you allow the government to transgress in order to help it protect us in a crisis?
Well, the problem is we do not live in a perfect world. We live in a world that's been created by an ever-growing government and an ever more dependent population of citizens that rely on the government for help. If that was never the case, if this country moved along as was envisioned by their founders, where every person was a free citizen, but also knew that they were responsible for themselves in every way, you would see that people would be much more prepared in the case of a crisis, because they would know that if something bad happened, they would be responsible to take care of themselves and their family members.
Yeah, and part two of that would be that they would know that the government wasn't going to do it, and that was proper. And that this situation we have now is ridiculous. Everybody should be appalled at the idea that the federal government is adding $4 trillion in debt in order to get us through a crisis that maybe isn't even a crisis. Maybe we were sold a bill of goods on this virus. Maybe we didn't need to shut down at all. Maybe the people who were vulnerable to this bug could have simply isolated. 91% of the deaths reported by the CDC thus far to the CDC and collated, which is only about a quarter of the total so far. But 91% of the 15,000 people they've coded so far regarding the data connected to their deaths, 91% are over the age of 55. Why couldn't the over 55-year-old class been responsible for their own hiding out, and everybody else could have gone about their business?
Yeah, I mean, certainly hindsight is a lot more clear. I think that, our leaders on a national level, President Trump and, the people that he had in the room with him at the time thought this was going to be a much larger concern. They were talking about the potential of millions of people being infected and potentially dying.
But that's what you need leaders for, is when their advisors are talking craziness. You look at me and say, we can't shut down the economy.
I don't disagree. This is a minor criticism of the president that I have, which is that I think he turned over too much of the responsibility of the decision-making to his medical experts, Dr. Fauci in particular. His job is to get everybody in the room, the economic experts, the trade experts, et cetera, and really weigh the information so that you can make an intelligent decision. But unfortunately, I think he sensed some fear. And, the reaction was over the top. And the problem is that it's almost impossible to walk that back at some point. And I don't want to minimize.
Hold that thought, Rob. I got to take a quick break, and we'll continue with Rob Sampson, state senator from Wolcott. We will be right back on WTIC.
Radio just got even.
It's WTIC. I love having Rob Sampson on because Rob is he's one of those few elected officials in the state of Connecticut who believes in the American system of government, is committed to working in the direction of us sustaining that. And most people go into a legislative body and go into the Connecticut General Assembly with the idea that maybe they don't have an idea, maybe they have no inkling of what they're getting themselves into, and then they're taken under the wing of leadership and they're taught how things work there. And how things work there is your vote has nothing to do with your principles. It has nothing to do with what you believe in and want to do. It's something that you use as capital. And every once in a while, if you want to break with leadership for an important vote for you or your district, you can do that to assure your reelection. But most of the time, you're expected to fall into line with what you're told to do. And Rob is just one of the few who's about American principles, small government, protecting us from big government, which is the most dangerous force there is. So that's why it's nice to have you here, Rob. Thank you for doing it again.
And my focus has been, since first getting elected, to make sure that I not so much, work to get reelected or even fighting policy in the legislature. Obviously, those things are important to me. But more important than that is teaching every person that I come in contact with the value of those American founding principles. The fact that the quality of life that we have comes from freedom and capitalism. The way our government was set up was destined to allow the human spirit to reach its full potential. And, as we drift away from those principles and that freedom and limited government, we also drift away from our full potential. And therefore, you have a society which largely believes the government's job. And you see, and I don't blame people for this, but people think the government's job is to help them. That was not the vision of America to begin with, and it shouldn't be today. People should recognize that they can achieve so much more if they are responsible for themselves.
It's an amazing thing how effectively those who hold elective office, whose job it should be to do what you just described, to make clear to us day in and day out exactly what the role of government is. And that is, by the way, to protect us from government, to protect us from its own overreach, to make sure that our liberties are protected. How gross is it that we get double-crossed on basic principles like that from people we represent us who swear an oath to the Constitution?
Right. Well, it's amazing to me that we allow people on the left side of the political spectrum to always claim the moral high ground. When, in fact, I don't believe they have the right to the moral high ground. The government deciding how much they're going to tax one group of people and deliver that money to whatever group they choose, there's nothing moral about that whatsoever. If you are having things taken from you by force, and make no mistake, when you pay your taxes, trust me, it's under the force of going to prison. There's nothing moral about that. It's totally different from charity, which is a voluntary giving of something to someone else. But often in our politics, they try and equate wealth redistribution policies as charity, and anyone that speaks against those policies as being against helping others. And this is simply false. And what people on our side of the spectrum need to do is to stand up and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. The only moral thing is for people to be able to keep what they earn for themselves, because anything else is either theft or requiring someone else to do work for your benefit, which is slavery. Both things are immoral, and we should be unafraid to stand up and say so.
Yeah, so I'm sick of it. And I want to educate everybody, which is the fun of having you on, because you're the guy I could talk with about this and in this manner, and that is to make clear to people. So when there's an argument like for paid family medical leave that was passed last year, what do you say to people who say, oh, that's good, that'll make everyone's life easier?
Well, I mean, that's a terrible policy because, first off, it is a payroll tax that everyone's going to pay regardless of whether or not they use that program or not. So people are being robbed who will never use that benefit. And they're being robbed not just of the money, they're being robbed of the choice of what to do with their money, whether they want to put it in their own health insurance fund or for some other purpose that they deem appropriate. That's the whole point of pursuit of happiness. You make your own choices as an American citizen. And, everyone loses choice in that situation. The employer's losing choice also. They might decide they want to offer some sort of benefit to their employees as an encouragement to come work for their company. But they can't. They don't get to decide their own way. They have to use this cookie cutter example that the government has created. And, there's a million other problems with that program. I don't know if you want to really delve into that, but I could.
No, not really. I just wanted your basic argument because it's a good one. And yeah, it's big government. And every time the government is doing one of those things, it's taking money out of our pockets, out of the economy. And to me, the bigger one is that the real purpose of these programs isn't to help people. It isn't to provide them the benefit. It's to put more power into the hands of the political party that passes those policies so that they can use it to solidify blocks of voters. And ultimately, that becomes an electioneering scheme. Hold on, Rob. We've got to go to break. If you can stay longer, please do. News time on WTIC.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month.
Couple of heavy.
Rob Sampson, senator from Wolcott, and a Liberty guy. Love that. Are you good to stay a few more minutes? I want to pick your brain about a couple more things. You mentioned the Overton window before. The Overton window is a concept, an analogy, I guess, for the acceptable, what's considered acceptable policy or philosophy in politics. Is that how you look at it?
Pretty much exactly. It's
yes.
What we can get away with at any given time if you have bad ideas.
Well, that's a good way to look at it. So it seems to me what has aggressively and purposefully been done over the past several years, mostly by Democrats, is trying.
Hi, I'm Jay Farner, CEO of Quicken Loans and Rocket Mortgage. During these challenging times,
Sampson, senator from Wolcott, and a Liberty guy. Love that. Are you good to stay a few more minutes? I want to pick your brain about a couple more things. Rob. Oh, wait a sec. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Rob. Are you good?
I am good, yes. Appreciate the opportunity.
You mentioned the Overton window before. The Overton window is a concept, an analogy, I guess, for the acceptable, what's considered acceptable policy or philosophy in politics. Is that how you look at it?
Pretty much exactly. It's
yes.
What we can get away with at any given time if you have bad ideas.
Well, that's a good way to look at it. So it seems to me what has aggressively and purposefully been done over the past several years, mostly by Democrats, is trying to move the Overton window away from the traditional American values, the American system of government, the notion of self-reliance, which I think most people remember it in their parents, if not in their grandparents, and not in other adults in their community who they came to know, where there was a built-in expectation of self-reliance. People who would never, people will say about their parents, we were poor, but my mother never would have accepted a handout from the government. And that idea of pride about your own self-sufficiency is gone, Rob. And I think it's because of an aggressive campaign to teach us that we should be dependent on the government and not dependent on ourselves. And that is the moving of the Overton window.
You're absolutely correct. I wouldn't say it's gone. I mean, it's diminished. There's no question about it. And that's because the people that disagree with the notion that we should be self-reliant and consider the founding principles of this country our direction moving forward, they control education for the most part. They control the media for the most part. They control entertainment, and in this state, they control the government. So it's not surprising that in places where that's going on, people are not hearing the other viewpoint. The notion of why we have the quality of life that we have is a result of that American spirit, the ingenuity, the inventiveness, all of the wealth creation that happened at the beginning of this country and continues to this day. And I just think about how much that creation and innovation has been limited by the socialist policies that have pervaded our society in the last 30 years. We would be in a lot better shape today financially otherwise.
Oh, yes. I think it's important to point out, well, but the last point you made about our financial situation, all of this has to happen when you have big government, because big government the purpose of big government is not to take care of people, it's to take care of politicians. The more they control, the more giveaways they have, the ability to control the direction of, the more power they have to rig elections. And the Democrats have built a whole scheme of rigging elections, but we can see now that Donald Trump, eager to win in November, is perfectly willing to ravage our financial futures to spend money that doesn't exist, just like Democrats do at the state level. So there's really, at this point, we can look at everybody and say, even if they didn't want to work this way, this is the condition of the competitive marketplace. It's like when guys were taking steroids in baseball. That created a competitive atmosphere where if you wanted to be one of the great hitters of the era, you had to do the same thing.
You're absolutely right about that. And politics and politicians are downstream from public opinion. And I believe that the president's actions are in direct response to public opinion. And my colleagues in Hartford, they respond in the same way. And after all, they get reelected over and over again for doing the things that they do that you and I might disagree with, but clearly it's not affecting them at the ballot box. So that's why they continue to do it. And this particular situation is a perfect example. Right now, we are at the intersection of three very, very important issues that all deserve attention. The actual severity to whatever extent it is of this virus and its effect on our society, and in particular our state, the impact on our state's economy, businesses, etc., And third is the actions of our government and any potential overreach. And any responsible person must recognize that all of these are legitimate issues, and they need to be looking at them all very carefully. But I will tell you that very few of my colleagues who I speak with privately and agree with me that they see things happening in our government that are just out of control, they're not about to come out and talk about those things publicly because they don't believe that their constituents are ready for that they're not going to respond favorably if they do, and therefore they stay quiet. So when people come to me and say, hey, Rob, what can we do to get people to wake up about what's happening? I come back to them with the same thing I always do, which is you got to convince and teach your neighbors about the important values and what they are and why we need them.
Yeah, so I think there is a big responsibility on the part of Republicans who, I think for other reasons than what you're articulating. I know what you just said goes on, and that we have reached a point where the anti-American attitudes are the dominant ones, and they're the ones controlling the Overton window, the sense of what is acceptable to say. It is now acceptable to run for president and be competitive and be a lifelong socialist by your own definition. Right. And that represents a stunning change that I think was only made possible because Republicans never wanted to talk philosophy. And I don't understand why Republicans stopped doing this, but they just seemed content to work quietly behind the scenes to affect the political outcomes they wanted, and they've always been able to do it. But now the tipping point seems to have been reached where the beliefs have changed, and the Democrats have worked hard to make sure that people can't get out of poverty. They've worked hard to make sure we're importing new people into the country to fill up the poorest areas. So they're in an expansion plan in terms of their core voters and their dependency on the government. So that's why I think we've reached the point where, that's where the Overton window is. Most people, or at least half the people in the state, are willing to vote for things that are patently against the notion of the American system of government.
No, you're absolutely right about that, Todd. The thing is, I do a lot of reading of American history and of our founders, and you will see snippets in their own writings about how they know that it's inevitable that our country is going to move in this direction. They knew that the government that they created could never stay in as small as the vision to maximize freedom. They knew even then. There's the famous quote from Franklin about a republic if you can keep it. The thing about politics is it has reached the point where now identity politics has become such a useful tool, and it is accepted in government now for politicians to cater to various constituency groups by saying, look, if you vote for me, I'm going to benefit your group, whether it's minorities or gays or even a business community on the Republican side, or corporate welfare, or any particular thing, or I'm going to focus on jobs. Speaking to specific constituency groups in a way to encourage their support. But when you do that, those policies always have to come at the expense of other people. And the vision of this country is that we're never going to do that. We're not going to divide people up in that way and decide that one gets a benefit at the expense of the other. But now that that is an accepted way that policy is made, it is very hard to combat. The Democrats come out with a policy and they're going to create a health benefits package for women. And that sounds great to the average person on the street, and it's wonderful and great. And when Rob Sampson stands up and says, hey, wait a second, I don't want to do a health care package for women. I love women. I want to take care of them, but why isn't this a health care package for everyone? You end up being the bad guy. And that's what's become so dangerous about this, is that it becomes weaponized. Identity politics is definitely weaponized in this era, and it's because we've gotten away from the idea that the government shouldn't be engaged in such sweeping policy to begin with.
Rob, anything you want to push people to? Anything going on, events or something online you want them to see?
I I just would urge people who are watching what's happening to be very thoughtful about the three things I mentioned. And when they engage with other people, try and approach them in a way to get them to understand that all three are important. I don't know. I texted you earlier today to send you some images that were put out by the leader of the Democratic Senate, Bob Duff, essentially saying that anyone that is upset about the government's actions is misbehaving in some way. And I think that's
you're talking with regard to the shutdown.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you if I'm over my time. But Bob Duff was tweeting things basically saying that if you're protesting this, you are risking the lives of others, and you don't even deserve the benefits of your own insurance. And that's just, what kind of speak is that from a person that represents constituents that may or may not agree with that view? It's just it's not be pulled off.
Yeah, it's inappropriate, but it's also stupid. I mean, the debate is not about are we going to keep our foot on the brake forever, or are we going to step on the gas forever? It's about managing the proper balance between those two things. We are not just dealing with dying people, we are dealing with a dying economy. And we've got to balance the needs of both of those things. So anybody trying to make it an absolute like that is just doing the worst kind of politics.
You're absolutely right. It's irresponsible completely. I agree with you that both things are important and they need to be measured. And the people that are saying that if you're concerned about the economy, you don't care about the lives or the public health of others, it's simply disgraceful and it's dishonest. And I encourage people to just look away when that happens, because those people deserve no attention at all.
Yeah, well, I prefer if they run in and yell in their faces what we've been saying. I hope you don't mind. Rob Sampson, thank you, sir.
I can't disagree.
State Senator from Wolcott. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Pat.
All righty. Rob Sampson is his name. Get to know it. He's a good guy, and he is devout in terms of protecting the American system of government. 860